The morning light had barely begun to peek through the blinds when David and Tamika Johnson were startled awake by what sounded like a car engine revving right outside their window. David groaned and rolled over to check the time. 5:17 a.m. Again? That's the third time this week, Tamika whispered, pulling the covers over her head. David sighed and sat up, rubbing his eyes. I know. Let me check what's going on. The Johnsons had lived in their suburban home for just over 3 years. They'd fallen in love with the quiet street, the well-kept yards, and the sense of community that seemed to flow through the neighborhood. As healthcare workers, David as a nurse practitioner and Tamika as a respiratory therapist, they valued their sleep, especially before their early shifts at the local hospital. Their morning routine was sacred. Wake up at 6 a.m., go for a quick jog together, shower, have breakfast, and leave for work by 7:30. It was clockwork, at least until the Collins family moved in next door 2 months ago. David pulled back the curtain and peered out the window. Just as he suspected, Robert Collins was outside, revving the engine of his vintage car that he claimed needed regular maintenance. The strange thing was, Robert only seemed to need to do this maintenance at dawn, just before the Johnsons needed to get ready for work. Is it him again? Tamika asked, her voice muffled under the pillow. Yep, playing with that car again. Tamika checked her phone. We only had 20 more minutes before the alarm. Might as well get up now. They'd tried to be good neighbors when the Collins family first arrived. Tamika had baked her grandmother's famous sweet potato pie as a welcome gift. David had helped Robert carry in some of the heavier furniture. They'd invited them to the neighborhood barbecue the following weekend. Everything seemed fine at first. Friendly waves, casual conversations about the weather, offers to collect mail during vacations. Then the noises started. It began with Robert mowing his lawn at dawn. The Johnsons didn't think much of it the first time. Maybe he wanted to beat the summer heat. Then came the power washing of his driveway, also at dawn. Then the leaf blower, even though it was the middle of summer with hardly any leaves to blow. Maybe he's just an early riser, Tamika had suggested after the first week. Some people are like that. David wasn't convinced. Every day, though? And always with the loudest possible activity? As they got ready for work that morning, skipping their usual jog because they were already behind schedule, David wondered if they were overreacting. After all, everyone had the right to maintain their property. I'm going to take the trash out, David said, slipping on his shoes. Outside, Robert was polishing his car with an electric buffer, the machine's hum cutting through the quiet morning air. David raised his hand in greeting, but Robert seemed deeply focused on a spot on the hood. Morning. Robert, David called out, wheeling their trash bin to the curb. Robert looked up, as if noticing David for the first time. Oh, hey, early start today? Not by choice, David replied with a tight smile. The noise woke us up. Noise? Robert's brow furrowed. Oh, you mean the car? Sorry about that. Got to keep her running smooth. She's a classic, you know. At 5 in the morning, though. Robert shrugged. Best time of day. No distractions. David nodded, not wanting to start an argument. Well, just so you know, we usually try to sleep until 6. Both of us work at the hospital and our shifts can be pretty demanding. Right, Robert said, turning back to his car. I'll try to keep it down. But the next day, it was the leaf blower again, and the day after that, Robert decided to hammer something onto the side of his house at 5:30 a.m. This can't be a coincidence, Tamika said over breakfast a week later. It's like he's doing it on purpose. David stirred his coffee thoughtfully. But why would he do that? We've been nothing but nice to them. Tamika hesitated. Do you think it might be because we're the only black family on the street? David had considered this possibility, but had been reluctant to voice it. They'd experienced subtle forms of prejudice before. Being followed in stores, neighbors clutching their purses tighter when they walked by, real estate agents steering them away from certain neighborhoods. But this was 2025. They'd bought this house because the area seemed progressive and welcoming. I don't want to jump to conclusions, David said carefully. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt for now. I'll try talking to him again this evening, more directly this time. That evening, after spotting Robert working in his garage, David walked over with 2 bottles of beer as a peace offering. The garage was immaculate, tools hanging in perfect order on pegboards, the floor swept clean. Thought you might like a cold one, David said, holding out the bottle. Robert seemed surprised but accepted it with a nod. Thanks. Nice of you to stop by. They made small talk about the neighborhood, the upcoming block party, and Robert's job as a financial advisor. David waited for a natural pause in the conversation before bringing up the issue. So, about the early morning activities, he began, keeping his tone light. I know I mentioned it before, but it's really been disrupting our sleep. We both work in healthcare, and sometimes we're on our feet for 12-hour shifts. Getting good rest is pretty important for us. Robert took a long sip of his beer. Like I said, I'll try to keep it down. I appreciate that, David said. But is there any way you could maybe schedule the noisier stuff for later in the day? Even just an hour or two later would make a big difference. For a moment, something flickered across Robert's face. Annoyance, perhaps, or something else David couldn't quite identify. Then his expression smoothed out and he smiled. Sure thing, neighbor. Didn't realize it was such a big deal. I'll be more considerate. David felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Thanks, man. That means a lot. They clinked bottles and David headed home feeling hopeful. I think we've got it sorted, he told Tamika. He seemed understanding. The next morning, they woke up naturally to their 6 a.m. alarm. No neighbor-induced disruptions. The morning after that was peaceful, too. By the third morning of uninterrupted sleep, they thought the problem was solved, see? David said as they jogged side by side through the quiet streets. All it took was a direct conversation. Tamika smiled, but there was a hint of reservation in her eyes. I hope you're right. On the fourth day, at exactly 5:15 a.m., they were jolted awake by what sounded like metal being dragged across concrete, followed by the unmistakable whine of a power tool. David shot up in bed. You've got to be kidding me. Tamika groaned and buried her face in her hands. It's like he waited just long enough for us to think he'd stopped. When David looked out the window this time, he saw Robert setting up what appeared to be a workbench right beside their shared fence. He had dragged it into position, hence the scraping sound, and was now using some kind of electric saw. This can't be a coincidence, David muttered. What do we do now? Tamika asked, already knowing they wouldn't be going back to sleep. David watched as Robert glanced up toward their window, saw David looking and gave a small wave before turning back to his project. I don't know, David admitted, letting the curtain fall back into place. But we need to figure something out. This can't go on. As they got ready for work that morning, moving through their routine with less energy than usual, they discussed their options. Should they try talking to Robert again? Involve the homeowners association? Call the police for a noise complaint? Let's give it a few more days, Tamika suggested. Document everything. Take videos. Note the times. If it keeps happening, we'll have proof it's not just a one-off thing. David nodded reluctantly. Okay, but I have a feeling this is just the beginning. He had no idea how right he was. For the next week, David and Tamika kept a detailed log of every early morning disturbance. They used their phones to record videos and take notes on the timing and nature of each noise. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Robert Collins seemed to be deliberately targeting the hours between 5 and 6 a.m., just before they needed to wake up for work. Look at this, Tamika said one evening, spreading their documentation on the kitchen table. Monday, power tools at 5:20 a.m. Tuesday, car alarm going off repeatedly at 5:15. On Wednesday, moving furniture. On his deck at 5:30 a.m. Thursday, leaf blower at 10 a.m. Friday, playing what sounded like a basketball against our shared wall at 5:25 a.m. David looked at the evidence, a knot forming in his stomach. And notice how there's nothing on the weekends. That's when we usually sleep in. It's like he knows our schedule, Tamika said quietly. They had both been trying to avoid the obvious conclusion, but it was getting harder to deny. Robert seemed to be singling them out for harassment. I think we need to try talking to him one more time, David suggested. But this time we go together. That Saturday afternoon, they spotted Robert washing his car in the driveway. Taking a deep breath, they walked over together. Hey, Robert, David called out, keeping his voice friendly despite his frustration. Got a minute to chat? Robert shut off the hose and turned to face them. Sure thing. What's up? Tamika stepped forward. We wanted to talk about the early morning noise. We've noticed it's been happening almost every weekday, and it's really affecting our sleep and our work performance. We've actually been keeping track, David added, showing Robert his phone with the log they'd created. It seems to be a pattern, always between 5 and 6 a.m. and always on days when we have work. Robert's expression hardened slightly. Are you accusing me of something? Not at all, Tamika said quickly. We just want to understand if there's a reason you need to do these things so early, and if there's any way we could find a compromise. Robert crossed his arms. Look, I'm sorry if I've been disturbing you, but this is my property, and I have a right to maintain it. Some things just need to be done in the morning. Every weekday morning, though? David questioned. And always with the noisiest possible activities? You two seem awfully sensitive, Robert replied, his tone shifting from defensive to dismissive. Maybe you should invest in some earplugs, or adjust your schedule if you're having such a hard time. Tamika blinked, taken aback by his suggestion. We work at the hospital, Robert. We can't just change our shifts because our neighbor decides to use power tools at dawn. Well, that's not really my problem, is it? Robert shrugged. This is a friendly neighborhood. People who live here generally don't make a fuss about every little thing. The implication hung in the air, unspoken but clear. You don't belong here if you're going to complain. David felt Tamika tense beside him, and he placed a gentle hand on her back. We're not trying to make a fuss, he said evenly. We're just asking for basic courtesy, the same we'd extend to you. Like I said, Robert replied, picking up his hose again. Invest in some earplugs. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to finish washing my car. They walked back to their house in silence, both processing what had just happened. Did you hear how he said, people who live here? Tamika finally said once they were inside. As if we don't belong in this neighborhood. David nodded grimly. I caught that too. That night they discussed their options over dinner. They could approach the homeowners association, but they'd heard stories about how slow and ineffective HOAs could be with these kinds of disputes. They could file a noise complaint with the police, but was that too extreme? Would it make the situation worse? Maybe we should try talking to some of the other neighbors, David suggested. See if anyone else has had problems with him or if it's just us. The next day, they casually chatted with a few neighbors while out for their Sunday walk. Nobody had anything negative to say about Robert Collins. In fact, several mentioned how helpful and friendly he'd been, offering to mow their lawns when they were out of town, helping an elderly resident install a new mailbox, organizing the neighborhood watch program. He's been such a great addition to the community, said Patricia from 2 doors down, always the first to volunteer for anything. David and Tamika exchanged a look. It seemed Robert Collins was a model neighbor, to everyone except them. On Monday morning at 5:12 a.m., they were awakened by the sound of Robert's car stereo blasting music at a volume that made their windows vibrate. David recorded it on his phone, adding it to their growing collection of evidence. That's it, Tamika said, her patience finally snapping. I'm going to talk to him right now. David started to object, but the determined look in his wife's eyes told him she'd made up her mind. He watched from the window as she marched across the lawn in her robe and slippers. Robert was sitting in his car, seemingly enjoying the music that was disturbing the entire block. He rolled down his window as Tamika approached. Morning, neighbor, he called out cheerfully, as if it were a perfectly normal time to be having a conversation. Beautiful day ahead, isn't it? Tamika cut straight to the point. Robert, it's 5 in the morning. Please turn down your music. You're waking up the entire neighborhood. Oh, sorry about that, he said, though his smile didn't reach his eyes. Just getting pumped for my day. Mondays, you know how it is. This isn't about Monday. This is about you deliberately making noise every weekday morning when you know we're trying to sleep. Robert's smile faded. That's a pretty serious accusation. I'd be careful about throwing around words like deliberately if I were you. We have evidence, Tamika said, holding up her phone. Weeks of it. And it only happens on days when we have work, never on weekends. It only happens between 5 and 6 a.m., just before we need to wake up. And it only started after we asked you to be more considerate. Sounds like you're being a bit paranoid, Robert said coldly. Maybe this neighborhood is a bit too high stress for you two. The implication was crystal clear this time. We have every right to be here, Tamika replied, her voice steady despite her anger. And we have every right to peaceful enjoyment of our home. Robert turned down his music slightly, though not enough to make a real difference, and rolled up his window, effectively ending the conversation. When Tamika returned, David was already dressed for work. What did he say? He asked, though he had a pretty good idea from watching their body language. He basically told me we don't belong here, Tamika said, her voice tight with anger and hurt. Not in those exact words, but that was the message. David pulled her into a hug. I'm sorry. I should have gone with you. No, it's probably better that you didn't. It might have escalated things. They went to work that day feeling defeated and frustrated. During their lunch break, they researched noise ordinances in their city and were encouraged to find that their neighborhood had specific restrictions on noise levels between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., so he is breaking the rules, David said. We could report him, but then what? Tamika wondered. Even if he gets a warning or a fine, he'll know it was us who reported him. It could make things worse. True, but at least we'd have some official recognition that what he's doing isn't okay. That evening, they received an email from their HOA. Someone had filed a complaint against them for confrontational behavior and creating a hostile environment. The email didn't name names, but they knew exactly who was behind it. He's trying to flip the script, David said incredulously. Make it seem like we're the problem. The HOA requested a meeting with both parties to discuss the situation. Tamika and David immediately responded, agreeing to the meeting and asking if they could present their evidence of the ongoing early morning disturbances. Over the next few days, while waiting for the HOA meeting, the early morning noise continued. But now there was a new dimension to Robert's harassment. They noticed him chatting with other neighbors, his eyes occasionally darting toward their house. A few times, neighbors who had previously been friendly seemed to avoid eye contact when they passed by. He's talking about us to everyone else, Tamika realized, spreading his side of the story first. Their suspicions were confirmed when Patricia, the neighbor who had praised Robert, stopped by with a casserole one evening. After some awkward small talk, she finally got to the point. I just wanted to check in and see if everything's okay. Robert mentioned there have been some tensions. David and Tamika shared a look. What exactly did Robert say? David asked carefully. Patricia shifted uncomfortably. Well, he mentioned that you two have been complaining a lot, that you expect the whole neighborhood to change their routines to accommodate you. He said he's tried to be patient, but what? Tamika prompted. He said some people just have trouble fitting into established communities, that you two might be happier somewhere more diverse. The word hung in the air like a thundercloud. After Patricia left, they sat in stunned silence for a while. He's making this about race, David finally said. He's painting us as the angry black couple who can't get along with anyone. Tamika reached for his hand. We can't let him control the narrative like this. We need to talk to the other neighbors, share our side of the story. The next day, they began reaching out to neighbors they had been friendly with, inviting them over for coffee or stopping to chat when they saw them outside. Without making direct accusations against Robert, they casually mentioned the early morning noise issues they'd been experiencing and how it was affecting their work at the hospital. Some neighbors were sympathetic, admitting they'd heard the noises too but hadn't realized it was a regular occurrence. Others seemed skeptical, subtly suggesting that perhaps they were being too sensitive. By the end of the week, it felt like the neighborhood was divided into camps, those who believed David and Tamika were being unreasonably harassed, and those who thought they were making a mountain out of a molehill. The HOA meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. As they prepared their evidence and practiced what they wanted to say, David and Tamika realized this had become about much more than noise. It was about their right to feel welcome and respected in their own neighborhood. Whatever happens at this meeting, David said, we need to stand our ground. We've done nothing wrong here, Tamika nodded, squeezing his hand. We belong here just as much as anyone else, and we're not going to let him bully us out of our home. Little did they know, the situation was about to reach a breaking point, one that would test their resolve in ways they never anticipated. The HOA meeting took place in the community center, a small building at the entrance of their subdivision. David and Tamika arrived 15 minutes early, nervous but prepared with their evidence. Videos, a detailed log of incidents, and even a decibel meter app they'd been using to measure the noise levels. They were surprised to find Robert already there, chatting amicably with two members of the HOA board. When he saw them enter, he gave them a smile that didn't reach his eyes. David, Tamika, He greeted them with exaggerated warmth. "I hope we can sort this all out today." The meeting began with introductions. The HOA board consisted of 5 members: Chen, the president; Barbara, the treasurer; William, the secretary; and 2 general members, Lisa and Greg. Chen explained that they would hear from both parties and then decide on a course of action. Since Robert filed the initial complaint, "We'll start with him," Chen announced. David and Tamika exchanged a surprised look. They hadn't realized Robert had been the one to contact the HOA first. Robert cleared his throat and began his version of events. According to him, he was just a friendly neighbor trying to maintain his property and enjoy his hobbies. He painted David and Tamika as overly sensitive newcomers who expected the entire neighborhood to change to accommodate them. "I've lived in this community for 10 years, Robert said, conveniently omitting that he'd only moved to their street 2 months ago. "I've never had any complaints from neighbors before. I believe in being a good neighbor, and I've always tried to be welcoming to everyone, regardless of their background." The slight pause before background wasn't lost on David and Tamika. "But ever since the Johnsons moved in," Robert continued, "it's been one complaint after another. I can't mow my lawn. I can't work on my car. I can't even play music without them coming over and making demands. They've been hostile and confrontational, accusing me of harassment just for living my life on my own property." He went on to describe how Tamika had aggressively approached him early one morning, making baseless accusations and threatening him. By the time he finished, he had completely flipped the narrative, making himself the victim and them the aggressors. When it was their turn to speak, David started by thanking the board for their time. "We moved to this neighborhood because we loved the community feel," he began. "For 3 years, we've had wonderful relationships with our neighbors. We volunteer for community events, we help with the food drive every Thanksgiving. We've never had any issues until Robert moved in next door 2 months ago." He explained how the noise had started, specifically targeting the early morning hours before their work shifts, and how it only happened on weekdays, never on weekends when they could sleep in. "We tried to resolve this privately," Tamika added. "We approached Robert with respect, explained our situation as healthcare workers who need our rest, and asked if he could do the noisy activities a bit later in the day. He agreed, but after a few days of quiet, the noise not only returned but got worse. They presented their evidence, the log of incidents, the videos, the decibel readings that clearly showed noise levels exceeding what was permitted by local ordinances during quiet hours. "We're not asking for special treatment," David emphasized. "We're just asking for the same courtesy that every neighbor should extend to another, to be mindful of noise during early morning hours, as specified in our own HOA rules." He pulled out a copy of the HOA guidelines, which clearly stated that excessive noise was prohibited between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. The board members reviewed their evidence, some looking troubled by what they saw and heard. But when Robert spoke again, he dismissed it all with a wave of his hand. "Those videos could have been taken any time," he argued, "and I find it very telling that they've been secretly recording me." "Who does that? That's an invasion of privacy." "It's documentation, not invasion," Tamika countered, trying to keep her voice level. "And the timestamps on the videos show exactly when they were taken," Robert scoffed. "Timestamps can be manipulated. And even if I was making some noise, it wasn't excessive. They're just being oversensitive." The meeting continued in this vein for nearly an hour, with Robert deflecting, minimizing, and occasionally implying that David and Tamika were playing some kind of race card, without explicitly saying it. Finally, Chen called for a short break so the board could discuss the situation privately. As they waited in the lobby, David and Tamika could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on them. "He's really good at this," Tamika whispered. "Twisting everything around," David nodded grimly. "And I get the feeling some of the board members are buying it." When they were called back in, Chen delivered the board's decision, a compromise. The HOA would send Robert a reminder about the noise regulations, but they would also suggest that David and Tamika try to be more understanding of normal neighborhood activities. There would be no official warning or fine for Robert. It was a slap in the face. Their evidence had been essentially dismissed, and Robert's behavior had been normalized as typical neighborhood activities, despite clearly violating the rules. As they left the meeting, Robert caught up to them in the parking lot. "See? I told you people here look out for each other," he said quietly so only they could hear. Maybe you two should consider if this is really the right place for you. David stepped between Robert and Tamika, his voice low but firm. We're not going anywhere, Robert. This is our home too. Robert just smiled. We'll see about that. The next morning, the noise started earlier than usual, 4:45 a.m., a full hour and 15 minutes before their alarm. This time, it was the sound of Robert dragging what appeared to be metal patio furniture across his deck, right outside their bedroom window. He's getting bolder, David said, recording yet another video. The HOA meeting just encouraged him. That day at work was particularly challenging. Both of them were exhausted and struggled to focus. Tamika, in particular, found it hard to maintain her usual cheerful demeanor with patients. You okay? Her colleague asked during their lunch break. You seem off today. Tamika hesitated, then found herself pouring out the whole story. Her colleague listened with growing concern. That sounds like harassment, she said when Tamika finished. And possibly discrimination. Have you thought about filing a police report? We've considered it, Tamika admitted. But we're worried it might escalate things even more. Or it might finally put a stop to it, her colleague pointed out. At the very least, you'd have an official record of what's happening. That evening, they discussed the idea of involving the police. Neither of them took the decision lightly. As Black Americans, they were well aware of the complicated relationship between their community and law enforcement. But they also believed in using the proper channels when necessary. Let's give it a few more days, David suggested. See if the HOA's talk with him makes any difference. But the next morning, they were awakened at 5:05 a.m. by Robert's leaf blower, aimed directly at their shared fence. David recorded it, adding yet another entry to their log. That weekend, they noticed something else concerning. Robert seemed to be spending a lot of time talking to their other neighbors, and occasionally groups of neighbors would glance in their direction when they were outside. Twice they overheard snippets of conversations that stopped abruptly when they approached. He's turning the whole neighborhood against us, Tamika realized with a sinking feeling. Their suspicions were confirmed when Liz, a neighbor they'd been friendly with since moving in, stopped by with a plate of cookies and an uncomfortable expression. I just wanted to check in, she said, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. See how you two are doing. We've been better, David admitted. This situation with Robert has been pretty stressful. Liz nodded, looking even more uncomfortable. That's actually kind of why I'm here. Some of the neighbors are concerned about the tension. Robert mentioned at the block party planning meeting that you two have been, well, making things difficult. Making things difficult, Tamika repeated incredulously. By asking him not to use power tools at 5 a.m? He said you've been recording him without permission, filing complaints, making demands. He said he feels targeted. David couldn't believe what he was hearing. Liz, we've lived here for 3 years. You know us. Do we seem like the kind of people who would harass a neighbor for no reason? Liz hesitated. No, but Robert's been such an active member of the community since he moved in. He's volunteered for everything, helped everyone out. It's hard to imagine he'd go out of his way to cause problems. That's exactly the point, Tamika said. He's deliberately creating this perfect neighbor image with everyone else while systematically harassing us. And it's working, everyone believes him. The conversation ended awkwardly, with Liz promising to keep an open mind, but clearly still skeptical of their claims. After she left, David and Tamika sat in silence for a while, processing what had just happened. He's isolating us, David finally said, making us look like the troublemakers. Tamika nodded, a realization dawning on her. And I think I know why. Did you notice it's just us he's targeting? We're the only black family on this street. They had both been dancing around this conclusion, hoping it wasn't true, wanting to believe that in 2025, they wouldn't face such blatant racism in their own neighborhood, but the evidence was becoming harder to ignore. The following week brought more of the same: early morning noise, cold shoulders from neighbors who used to be friendly, and a growing sense of isolation. They continued documenting everything, but it was taking a toll on their mental health and their performance. On Wednesday evening, they were sitting on their back porch trying to enjoy a rare moment of peace when they overheard Robert talking to another neighbor on his deck. They weren't intentionally eavesdropping, but his voice carried clearly in the quiet evening air. Just don't think they're a good fit for our community. Robert was saying. They're not like us, you know? Different values, different expectations. They're the ones who moved here, but they expect everyone else to change to accommodate them. Well, I've never had any problems with them, the other neighbor, whom they recognized as Todd from across the street, replied. That's because you're not living next to them, Robert said. Trust me, it's been a nightmare. My wife and I are even considering moving if this continues, and we love this neighborhood. That would be a shame, Todd said. You've been such a positive addition to the street. David and Tamika looked at each other, stunned. Robert was now threatening to move and making it seem like they were driving him away. This is getting out of hand, Tamika whispered. He's manipulating everyone. The next morning, right on schedule, they were awakened at 5:20 a.m. by the sound of Robert's car alarm going off repeatedly. David recorded it, then they both tried to go back to sleep, but it was useless. They were too agitated, too frustrated. At work that day, David made a mistake with a patient's medication, catching it before any harm was done, but it was a wake-up call. The stress and sleep deprivation were affecting his job performance, potentially putting patients at risk. When he got home and told Tamika about the incident, they made a decision. We need to take action, David said firmly. This isn't just about our comfort anymore. It's about our ability to do our job safely, about our right to live peacefully in our own home. Tamika nodded, reaching for her phone. I'm going to call the non-emergency police line. It's time to file a report. As she dialed, they both knew they were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But after months of harassment, isolation, and attempts at resolution that had gone nowhere, they felt they had no other choice. What they didn't know was that their decision to involve the police would set in motion a chain of events that would change everything. Not just for them and Robert, but for the entire neighborhood. Tamika's call to the non-emergency police line was answered by a dispatcher who took down their information and the nature of their complaint. They were told that an officer would come by that evening to take a formal report. Do you think we're doing the right thing? Tamika asked after hanging up, doubt creeping into her voice. David sighed, running a hand over his face. I don't know. But we've tried everything else. Talking to him directly, going through the HOA, reaching out to neighbors. Nothing has worked. If anything, it's getting worse. They spent the rest of the afternoon gathering all their evidence, compiling the videos, organizing their log of incidents, and preparing statements about what they had experienced. They weren't sure what to expect from the police visit, but they wanted to be as thorough and credible as possible. Officer Rivera arrived at 7:30 p.m., a middle-aged woman with a calm, professional demeanor. She sat at their dining room table and listened attentively as they explained the situation from the beginning, how the noise had started shortly after Robert moved in, how it always occurred during the early morning hours on weekdays, and how their attempts to resolve the issue peacefully had been met with escalation. And you believe this is targeted harassment? Officer Rivera asked, making notes on her tablet. Yes, David replied firmly. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidental. It only happens on days when we have work, never on weekends. It's always between 5 and 6 a.m. just before we need to wake up, and it started after we asked him to be more considerate. We also believe there may be a racial component to it, Tamika added hesitantly. We're the only black family on the street, and Robert has made comments to other neighbors suggesting we don't fit in with the community. Officer Rivera nodded, her expression neutral. Do you have any direct evidence of racial discrimination? They exchanged a look. Nothing explicit, David admitted. It's more subtle. Comments about us not belonging, not sharing the same values as the rest of the neighborhood. I understand, Officer Rivera said. Unfortunately, proving discrimination can be difficult without clear evidence. But the noise complaints are more straightforward. You mentioned you have videos? They showed her their collection of videos, each one clearly time-stamped showing Robert engaging in noisy activities during early morning hours, using power tools, revving his car engine, playing loud music, and so on. These are helpful, Officer Rivera said. And you've already spoken to your HOA about this? Yes, but they essentially dismissed our concerns, Tamika explained. They sent him a reminder about the noise regulations, but they also suggested we needed to be more understanding of normal neighborhood activities. There's nothing normal about using a leaf blower at 5 a.m., Officer Rivera remarked, raising an eyebrow. Especially when there are clear regulations about noise levels during those hours. Her response gave them a glimmer of hope. At least someone in authority was taking their concerns seriously. So what happens now? David asked. I'll file a report based on the information you've provided, Officer Rivera explained. Given the documentation you have, we can issue a warning to your neighbor about violating noise ordinances. If the behavior continues, he could face fines or other consequences. Will he know it was us who reported him? Tamika asked, concerned about further retaliation. Officially, yes. These types of complaints aren't anonymous, but I would advise against having any direct confrontation with him. If the harassment continues or escalates after our warning, call us immediately. After Officer Rivera left, they felt a mix of relief and anxiety. On one hand, they had finally taken concrete action that might lead to real consequences for Robert. On the other hand, they worried about how he would react once he received the warning. We should be prepared for things to get worse before they get better, David said, voicing what they were both thinking. The next morning, they woke up naturally to their alarm at 6 a.m. No noise, no disruptions. They looked at each other, surprised but cautious. Maybe the officer already spoke to him, Tamika suggested. Or maybe he's taking a day off from his harassment campaign, David replied, skeptical. They went through their morning routine, enjoying the rare peace but unable to fully relax. It felt like the calm before a storm. That evening, as they were preparing dinner, they heard a knock at their door. David looked through the peephole and saw Robert standing on their porch, his expression unreadable. It's him, he whispered to Tamika. Should we answer it? Tamika hesitated, then nodded. We can't hide from him forever, but let's record this just in case. She started the voice recorder on her phone and slipped it into her pocket before David opened the door. Robert, David said, his tone neutral. What can we do for you? Robert's face was tight with barely contained anger. I just had a visit from the police, he said, his voice low. They said you filed a complaint against me. For noise. We did, David confirmed, standing his ground. After months of trying to resolve this directly with you and through the HOA, we felt we had no other option. Do you have any idea what you've done? Robert hissed. I have a clean record. I'm respected in this community. And now I have a police report filed against me. You brought this on yourself, Tamika said, stepping forward to stand beside David. All we ever asked was for you to be considerate during early morning hours. That's not an unreasonable request. Robert's eyes narrowed. You know what I think? I think you two have had a chip on your shoulder from day one, playing the victim, looking for reasons to be offended, trying to make everything about race. We never mentioned race, David pointed out. Not to you, not until we had exhausted every other explanation for your behavior. Well, it's pretty clear what you're implying, Robert snapped. And I won't stand for it. I'm not going to have my reputation damaged by false accusations. There's nothing false about our complaints, Tamika replied. We have video evidence of you deliberately making noise during quiet hours, specifically on days when we have work. That's harassment, plain and simple. Robert took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I have friends in this community, on the HOA board, in local businesses, even in the police department. You really think anyone's going to take your side over mine? David felt a chill run down his spine, but he kept his expression neutral. Are you threatening us, Robert? I'm just stating facts, Robert replied with a cold smile. You two are outsiders here. I've been a part of this community for years. People know me, trust me. Who do you think they're going to believe? We believe in the truth, Tamika said firmly. And we have evidence to back it up. Robert laughed, a harsh sound without humor. Evidence, right, well, you've made your choice. Don't say I didn't warn you. With that, he turned and walked away, leaving them standing in their doorway, shaken but resolved. Did you get all that? David asked once they were back inside. Tamika nodded, pulling out her phone and stopping the recording. Every word, including what sounds a lot like threats. They sent the recording to Officer Rivera that evening, along with a summary of the conversation. She called them back within the hour. This is concerning, she said after listening to the recording. It doesn't rise to the level of an explicit threat, but combined with the pattern of harassment you've already documented, it definitely adds to your case. I'm going to update the report and speak with my supervisor about next steps. The following morning, they were awakened at 4:30 a.m., earlier than ever before, by what sounded like a full-scale construction project. When David looked out the window, He saw Robert setting up what appeared to be a table saw in his backyard, directly beneath their bedroom window. "He's not even trying to hide it anymore," David muttered, grabbing his phone to record. They watched in disbelief as Robert glanced up at their window, saw David recording, and gave a mocking wave before turning on the saw. The noise was deafening, even through their closed window. Tamika immediately called the non-emergency police line again. "He's deliberately violating the noise ordinance right now, after being warned by an officer yesterday. And he knows we're recording him. He's doing this to provoke us." The dispatcher assured them an officer would be sent out right away. In the meantime, they continued recording, capturing clear evidence of Robert's defiance of both the noise regulations and the police warning. 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up in front of their house. They watched from their window as 2 officers approached Robert, who immediately shut off the saw and adopted a friendly, confused demeanor. "We can't hear what they're saying," Tamika said, straining to see, "but we have the video," David reminded her. "That speaks for itself." After speaking with Robert for several minutes, the officers came to their door. It was a different officer this time, not Rivera, but a younger man named Officer Chen. "We've spoken with your neighbor," Officer Chen informed them. "He claims he's preparing materials for an urgent home repair project and didn't realize how early it was." David and Tamika exchanged an incredulous look. "Officer? That's simply not true," David said, struggling to keep his voice level. "We have video evidence showing he saw us at the window and waved directly at us before turning on the saw. He knows exactly what he's doing." They showed Officer Chen the video they had just recorded, as well as their extensive documentation of previous incidents. "This has been going on for months," Tamika explained. "And it escalated after we filed a police report yesterday. He came to our door last night and essentially threatened us. We have that recorded too." Officer Chen reviewed their evidence, his expression growing more serious. "This does appear to be a pattern of deliberate harassment," he acknowledged. "I'll be issuing him a citation for violating the noise ordinance, and we'll add this incident to your ongoing case file." "Will that be enough to stop him?" David asked. "He seems determined to drive us out of the neighborhood." "The citation comes with a fine," Officer Chen explained. "And if the behavior continues, the fines increase. In severe cases, it can even lead to more serious charges like criminal harassment. We take neighbor disputes seriously, especially when there's evidence of targeting or discrimination." After Officer Chen left, they watched from their window as he delivered the citation to Robert, whose friendly demeanor instantly vanished. Even from a distance, they could see his face contort with anger as he looked toward their house. "I don't think this is over," Tamika said quietly. "No," David agreed. "But at least we have the law on our side now." They were right to be concerned. While the direct noise harassment stopped after the citation, Robert apparently wasn't willing to risk additional fines. His campaign against them took a different form. Over the next week, they noticed more neighbors than ever giving them cold looks or avoiding them entirely. Twice they found anonymous notes in their mailbox suggesting they stop causing trouble and learn to be better neighbors. Someone slashed one of their car tires, though they had no proof it was connected to the dispute with Robert. The final straw came the following Sunday, when they returned from grocery shopping to find the word "troublemakers" spray painted across their garage door. "That's it," David said, his voice tight with anger as he took photos of the vandalism. "This has gone beyond harassment. This is a hate crime." They called the police immediately, and this time Officer Rivera returned with a forensics technician who took samples of the paint and dusted for fingerprints. There were no security cameras on their street, and none of the neighbors claimed to have seen anything suspicious. Unfortunately, without witnesses or video evidence, it may be difficult to prove who did this, Officer Rivera told them. "But given the ongoing situation with your neighbor, we'll certainly investigate him as a person of interest." As they scrubbed the graffiti off their garage door that evening, David and Tamika had a long, difficult conversation about their future in the neighborhood. "Is it worth it?" Tamika asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Constantly looking over our shoulders, wondering what he'll do next." David sighed heavily. "I don't want to leave. It feels like letting him win, letting racism win. But I'm also worried about our safety, our mental health, our jobs. This stress is affecting everything." They stayed up late into the night weighing their options, researching their legal rights, and trying to imagine various scenarios for moving forward. By morning, they had made a decision, one that was painful but felt necessary for their well-being. "We'll start looking for a new place," David said, the words heavy in his mouth. "But we're not going to just disappear. We're going to make sure there are consequences for what's happened here." Tamika nodded, determination replacing the exhaustion in her eyes. "We're going to fight this even if we decide to move. Not just for us, but for whoever might come after us." That day, they contacted a civil rights attorney who specialized in housing discrimination cases. They scheduled a consultation for later that week and began compiling all their evidence into an organized file. They also reached out to Officer Rivera to update her on their decision and to ask about the status of the investigation into the vandalism. "We have no concrete evidence linking your neighbor to the graffiti," she admitted, "but the detective assigned to your case is still investigating. In the meantime, would you like us to increase patrols in your area?" They accepted the offer, grateful for the extra security but aware that it was a temporary measure at best. What they needed was a permanent solution, one that would allow them to live without fear, without harassment, without constantly having to prove they belonged. As they began their search for a new home, they found themselves torn between sadness at being forced out of a neighborhood they had once loved and hope for a fresh start somewhere truly welcoming. But one thing was certain: they weren't going to leave quietly. They were going to ensure that their experience was documented, that the authorities were fully aware of what had happened, and that Robert faced whatever consequences the law would allow for his campaign of harassment. The road ahead would not be easy, but they were determined to walk it together, supporting each other every step of the way. Their story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The meeting with the civil rights attorney, Elaine Winters, gave David and Tamika their first real sense of hope in months. After reviewing their extensive documentation, Elaine confirmed what they already suspected. They had a strong case for harassment and potentially discrimination. "What you've experienced goes beyond typical neighbor disputes," Elaine explained, her voice firm with conviction. "The pattern of targeted harassment, the escalation after you filed complaints, the isolation tactics, and especially the vandalism, these point to a coordinated effort to make you uncomfortable in your own home." "Can we prove it was all Robert?" Tamika asked. "We don't have direct evidence that he spray-painted our garage. We don't need to prove he personally committed every act," Elaine clarified. "We just need to establish that he created a hostile living environment based on discriminatory intent. Your recordings, especially the one where he talks about you not fitting in and being outsiders, are very helpful in establishing that." They discussed their options. They could file a civil lawsuit against Robert personally. They could pursue a housing discrimination complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, QD, or they could do both simultaneously. "I recommend we start with the HUD complaint," Elaine advised. "It's a more straightforward process and it puts the investigative resources of the federal government behind your case. We can always pursue a civil lawsuit later if necessary." David and Tamika agreed, and they began the process of filing the formal complaint that same day. Elaine helped them organize their evidence and craft a detailed timeline of events, from the first morning disturbances to the escalating harassment and the garage vandalism. As they worked on the complaint, they also continued their search for a new home. They focused on diverse neighborhoods with strong community engagement, researching crime rates, school quality, and proximity to their workplace. They weren't just looking for a house, they were looking for a genuine community where they could feel safe and welcomed. 2 weeks after filing the HUD complaint, they received notice that an investigator had been assigned to their case and would be contacting them soon for interviews. Around the same time, Detective Harris from the local police department called with an update on the vandalism investigation. "We've been questioning neighbors and checking local security cameras," Detective Harris informed them. "We haven't found direct evidence linking Mr. Collins to the graffiti, but we did discover something interesting. A security camera from a house 2 streets over caught footage of someone matching his description, walking in the direction of your home around the time the vandalism likely occurred, carrying what appears to be a bag. Is that enough to charge him?" David asked, hope rising in his chest. "Not yet," the detective admitted. "The footage is from too far away to make a positive ID, and the person's face isn't clearly visible. But it's enough to keep him as our primary person of interest. We're continuing to investigate." The news was both encouraging and frustrating. They finally had some external validation that they weren't imagining things, that their suspicions about Robert had merit. But they still lacked the definitive proof needed for legal action against him, specifically for the vandalism. Meanwhile, life in the neighborhood had become increasingly uncomfortable. Most neighbors avoided them entirely, crossing the street when they saw them coming or suddenly becoming busy with their phones when they passed by. A few, like Patricia and Todd, made awkward attempts at friendliness, but the tension was palpable. Robert himself had adopted a new strategy: complete and utter avoidance. He would go inside if he saw them approaching, or quickly get in his car and drive away. The early morning noise had stopped, but they still felt the weight of his hostility and the community's suspicion. "It's like we're ghosts in our own neighborhood," Tamika remarked one evening as they walked their dog, noting how porch conversations stopped as they approached. "People see us coming and suddenly remember they have somewhere else to be." David squeezed her hand. "It won't be for much longer. The realtor thinks we should have some good options to look at by next week." Their realtor, Michelle, had been a godsend, understanding their situation without judgment and working tirelessly to find them a new home that met all their criteria. She'd also connected them with the local Urban League chapter, which offered support services for families experiencing housing discrimination. Through the Urban League, they were introduced to other families who had faced similar situations. Hearing these stories was both heartbreaking and oddly comforting. Heartbreaking to know that their experience wasn't unique, that this kind of discrimination still happened regularly in 2025, but comforting to know they weren't alone, that others had survived this and even thrived afterward. One evening, after a particularly promising house viewing in a diverse neighborhood about 20 minutes from their current home, they returned to find Officer Rivera's patrol car parked in front of their house. "Did something happen?" Tamika asked, her heart racing as they pulled into their driveway. Officer Rivera met them at their car, her expression serious but not alarming. "No new incidents," she assured them. "But I wanted to update you in person. We've been monitoring the situation closely, and we've noticed some concerning online activity that may be related to your case." Inside their home, Officer Rivera explained that the department's cyber unit had discovered posts on a local community forum where someone using a pseudonym had been making veiled comments about keeping the neighborhood's character and standing up to troublemakers. While the posts didn't mention them by name, the timing and content strongly suggested they were the targets. "We can't prove it's Mr. Collins," Officer Rivera said, echoing the familiar refrain, "but the IP address traces back to this neighborhood. We're working on getting more specific location data, but that requires additional warrants, so basically, he's continuing to turn the community against us." "Just in a more subtle way now," David said, frustration evident in his voice. "It appears that way," Officer Rivera acknowledged. "I wanted you to be aware of this development, and I also wanted to let you know that we're taking this very seriously. This kind of targeted harassment campaign is exactly how more serious incidents often begin." Her words hung in the air, the unspoken implication clear: things could get worse, potentially even dangerous. "We've increased patrols in your area," Officer Rivera continued, "and I'd like to recommend some additional security measures for your home, at least until you're able to relocate." She suggested installing security cameras, ensuring all doors and windows had secure locks, and considering a simple alarm system. The department could even arrange for a security assessment of their property at no cost. After Officer Rivera left, they sat in silence for a while, processing this latest development. "I feel like we're under siege in our own home," Tamika finally said, her voice small. David pulled her close. "I know, but we're going to get through this. And when we do, we're going to make sure Robert faces consequences for what he's done." The next day, they installed security cameras covering all approaches to their home and added extra locks to their doors. They also decided to accelerate their moving plans, asking Michelle to focus on homes that were available for immediate occupancy. The HUD investigator, Ms. Patel, contacted them to schedule an initial interview. She explained that the investigation would involve interviewing them, Robert, neighbors, and HOA board members, as well as reviewing all documentation related to the case. "The process typically takes several months," Ms. Patel told them. "But given the severity of your situation and the quality of your documentation, we're prioritizing your case. What if we move before the investigation is complete?" David asked. Does that affect our case? Not at all, Ms. Patel assured them. Many complainants relocate during the process. Your decision to move doesn't diminish the seriousness of what you've experienced or your right to seek justice. Their interview with Ms. Patel lasted nearly 3 hours, as they went through every incident in painstaking detail. She was thorough, professional, and most importantly, she believed them. After months of being dismissed, minimized, and gaslit, having someone in authority listen to their story and take it seriously was profoundly validating. A week later, Michelle called with exciting news. She'd found a house that checked all their boxes. It was in a diverse, established neighborhood known for its strong community ties. The previous owners had been transferred overseas for work and needed to sell quickly, meaning they could potentially close within a month. The house itself was slightly smaller than their current home, but had a larger yard and a finished basement that could serve as a home office or guest space. It was 15 minutes farther from the hospital, but the commute was still manageable. It's priced slightly above your initial budget, Michelle warned. But given the market and the features, it's actually a good value. They viewed the house that same evening and fell in love with it immediately. The neighborhood had a warm, welcoming feel, with people of various ages and backgrounds visible on porches and in yards. When they stopped to talk with a couple walking their dog, they were met with genuine friendliness, not the strained politeness they'd grown accustomed to in their current neighborhood. "This is it," Tamika said as they walked through the sunny kitchen. "This feels like a place we could truly call home." They made an offer that night, slightly below asking price but with a quick closing timeline. The sellers countered, and by the next morning they had a deal. The closing was set for 3 weeks out, sooner than they had anticipated, but a welcome acceleration given their circumstances. As they began packing and preparing for the move, they received another call from Detective Harris. This time his news was more definitive. "We've made some progress on your case," he told them. "We found the store where the spray paint was purchased and they had surveillance footage. The quality isn't great, but combined with the previous footage and some additional evidence we've gathered, we now have enough to bring Mr. Collins in for questioning." "Will he be arrested?" Tamika asked. "Not yet," Detective Harris said. "We need to question him first, see if he provides any information that either confirms or rules out our suspicions. But this is a significant step forward. The knowledge that the police were closing in on Robert gave them a sense of grim satisfaction. While they were still moving, still, in a sense, being driven out, they took comfort in knowing that he wouldn't get away with what he'd done. As their moving day approached, they decided to take one final step to ensure their story wouldn't be forgotten or dismissed. With Elaine's guidance, they wrote a detailed account of their experience, including dates, times, and descriptions of all incidents. They included copies of their evidence, the videos, the log, the recordings, and information about the ongoing HUD investigation and police case. They made copies of this package and sent it to key entities: the HOA board, the local newspaper, a regional civil rights organization, and even the mayor's office. They weren't seeking publicity. They explicitly requested that their privacy be respected. But they wanted to create a record that couldn't be ignored or erased. "This isn't just about us anymore," David explained to Elaine when she questioned whether this step was necessary. "It's about making sure this doesn't happen to the next family of color who moves into that neighborhood." The weekend before their move, they received word that Robert had been brought in for questioning regarding the vandalism. Detective Harris couldn't share the details of the interview, but he did mention that Robert had been notably uncomfortable when presented with the evidence they had gathered. "We're continuing to build our case," Detective Harris assured them. "Even if you're moving, we're not dropping this." On moving day, they were surprised by the appearance of several familiar faces. Their colleagues from the hospital had organized a moving crew to help them. Even more touching was the presence of Officer Rivera and Ms. Patel, both of whom stopped by briefly to check on them and offer support. "We just wanted to make sure everything goes smoothly today," Officer Rivera explained. "Sometimes these situations can become volatile at the end, but Robert was nowhere to be seen. His car was gone, his house silent. Several neighbors watched from their windows or porches as the moving truck was loaded, but no one approached, no one except for Liz, the neighbor who had brought cookies months ago. "I'm sorry," she said simply, standing awkwardly at the edge of their driveway. "I should have believed you." Tamika studied her for a moment, then nodded. Yes, you should have. But thank you for saying that now. It wasn't a dramatic reconciliation, but it was something, an acknowledgement, however belated, that they had been telling the truth all along. As they drove away from the house they had called home for 3 years, following the moving truck to their new beginning, they felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, sadness, anger, hope. They were leaving behind a place where they had once been happy, a community that had failed them, and a situation that had tested their resilience in ways they never could have anticipated. But they were also moving toward something better, a new home in a community that already felt more welcoming, a continued pursuit of justice through the HUD investigation and police case, and a deeper understanding of their own strength as individuals and as a couple. 3 months after their move, they received a letter from the HUD investigator. The initial findings supported their claim of harassment and discrimination, and Robert was facing potential fines and other penalties. 2 weeks after that, Detective Harris called to inform them that the district attorney had decided to file criminal charges against Robert for the vandalism, based on the evidence they had gathered. It's not over yet, the detective warned. These cases can take time to work through the system, but we're moving forward. On a warm Saturday morning, 6 months after leaving their old neighborhood, David and Tamika sat on the back deck of their new home, drinking coffee and watching birds at the feeder they had installed. Their new neighbors had invited them to a block party that afternoon, one of many community events they had participated in since moving. Do you ever regret it? David asked suddenly, standing up to him, fighting back. Sometimes I wonder if we should have just moved right away, avoided all that stress and pain. Tamika considered the question. No, she finally said. If we had just left quietly, he would have won completely. He might have done the same thing to the next black family who moved in. At least this way, there are consequences. And more importantly, there's a record. People know what happened. David nodded, reaching for her hand. And we know what we're capable of. How strong we are together. They sat in comfortable silence, enjoying the peace of their new home, the weight of their ordeal gradually lifting from their shoulders. They had been tested but not broken. They had been forced out but not defeated. And in finding the courage to stand up for themselves, to document the truth and to seek justice, they had turned their painful experience into something meaningful, a testament to resilience, a call for accountability and a step, however small, toward a world where everyone can feel at home in their own community.